This is the Playdate. It's a compact, charming, bright yellow handheld equipped with a sharp, non-backlit black and white display, a snappy D-pad and face buttons, and a fold-out metallic crank. It was made by a company in Portland, Oregon known as Panic, which, funny enough, is the same emotion I felt when I purchased this product and watched as $230 exited from my bank account, but more on that later. Panic, the company, however, is not the new kid on the block. They've been around since 1997, specializing in Mac and iOS software like Nova and Transmit, before dabbling in game publishing, helping to fund and release indie games you may have heard of, like Firewatch, Untitled Goose Game, and Thank Goodness You're Here. Software and publishing has always been Panic's bread and butter. Their experience with hardware back in 2011, however, was little to none. So starting the development of Playdate would mark the company's first endeavor into the hardware space. The final result led to an incredibly unique device with a robust combination of uncommon hardware and playful software, creating a product that shines among other handhelds today. The only problem, though, is that not enough people talk about this handheld, or even know of its existence. Sure, the system released and had its brief moment in the spotlight, but then it faded away into obscurity. And of course, I can understand some of the obvious reasons why. It's an extremely niche product for a very niche demographic of people that currently costs as much as the Switch Lite. So I can imagine why interest quickly died off. But even still, I feel that the Playdate at least deserves some more attention, solely because of how much effort and passion was poured into this device, and for how distinct it feels in the current gaming handheld market. Panic created a device that has its own exclusive games and software built on custom-made hardware, running on a custom OS with free access to the system's SDK, its very own emulator, and a drag-and-drop web-based tool that can be used for designing and importing your own games onto the Playdate in just minutes. In a time where so many handheld manufacturers are mass-producing handhelds with slightly varying form factors, I have to at least acknowledge the Playdate for just intentionally striving to be different. And it's for that reason that I want to shine a brighter spotlight on the Playdate today. I want to cover the Playdate's origins, the device's custom hardware, the quality and quantity of its games and apps, and the readily accessible game dev tools that you can mess around with today for free that don't even require a Playdate to try out. So with all that being said, let's get into this wacky, weird, bright yellow little crank machine. Beginning as a concept back in 2011, the Playdate was originally planned to be a modern-day Game & Watch, but with a twist. If you're unfamiliar with the Game & Watch, it was a series of handhelds that Nintendo released back in the 80s. Each device came pre-installed with two pieces of software which, you guessed it, are a single game and a watch. Shocking, I know. For the time, these devices were revolutionary. However, there was one small caveat. Each device could only display just one game, and if you wanted a new game, you had to purchase an entirely different Game & Watch. This was because the Game & Watch used what is called a segmented LCD display, which is the kind of screen that you would see on technology like digital watches and calculators. Basically, instead of having a grid of pixels that can draw anything on the display, the screen is made up of a bunch of fixed shapes or different pieces of artwork that can only be in two different states, either on or off. Because time has passed, technology has become a little better now. And so the Playdate was planned to use a more modern LCD display with a much higher pixel density. So the co-founder of Panic, Cable Sasser, had a different idea. What if we made a device that acted like a Game & Watch, displaying only a single game, and then a week later, that game would suddenly switch to a new one? This would not only surprise the user, but get them intrigued and curious about what other games this device may offer in the future, giving them something fun to look forward to. And this sounded like a unique idea, until Sasser realized,
I think I remember coming into the office on a Monday and being like, there's a problem, and that is that Game & Watch games are not very fun. Because it's true, those games are great, but for like an hour, maybe half an hour. Like, you know, in 1982, they were incredible, but they're just not super fun for very long periods of time. So then that was when we fully crossed the threshold into, I think it should be real games.
Suddenly, the scope and ambition of the Playdate changed, and the Playdate would go on through a decade-long process of refinement and iteration. As Stephen Frank, the other co-founder of Panic, puts it,
hardware is hard. Maybe that's why they call it that, but...
Well said, Stephen. Well said. Luckily though, Panic wasn't alone on their hardware journey, as the Playdate was designed in collaboration with a company called Teenage Engineering, an electronics manufacturer based in Sweden known for designing beautiful and ludicrously expensive synthesizers, and also a wooden doll choir? $250? $250 for Carlo? Okay, at that price point, just rinse yourself a real choir. Regardless, with Panic's unique concept and Teenage Engineering's design expertise, the Playdate would be available for pre-order on July 2021 and sell out its entire stock of 20,000 units in under 20 minutes. And in the following year, the Playdate would finally release on April 19th, 2022. Now, some time has passed since the handheld's release, and today, the Playdate boasts a niche but dedicated fan base that's still playing and developing new games and software for the device just about every week. There's a surprising amount of charming and impressive games on the Playdate, but to fully understand the creativity on display here, I think it's a good idea to take a quick look at the hardware itself. The creator of the Game & Watch, Gunpei Yokoi, coined a term that I think perfectly encapsulates the Playdate's hardware. It's called lateral thinking with withered technology. This is the design philosophy of using tech components that are more affordable and combining them to create hardware that focuses on innovation and fun, as opposed to creating technology with high-end specs. This concept isn't anything new. This is a concept that Nintendo's been following throughout all of its consoles and handhelds over the years, and I think is reflected in the Playdate's design as well, so just try to keep that philosophy in mind as we look at the hardware, because it's definitely not what you expect. Let's take a look at the screen first. The Playdate has a small 400 by 240 black and white display. The screen is quite small, but because of its size, the screen has such a high pixel density, making images look sharp and crisp. The Playdate screen is known as a memory LCD display, and memory LCD technology works differently from a regular LCD in that each pixel can remember whether it's black or white, and these pixels only change when something new needs to be displayed on screen. By comparison, a normal LCD display refreshes the screen many times per second, even if nothing changes on the screen. In the Playdate's case, since the memory LCD only updates pixels when necessary and doesn't rely on constant refreshing, the display uses significantly less power. The largest talking point of the Playdate screen, however, is that, as you can see, it does not have a backlight. Instead, the screen is reflective and gets brighter when in contact with ambient or direct light. And because of this, the screen looks fantastic when you're out in broad daylight, but doesn't stand a chance when you try to play in complete darkness. It's the world's first handheld that encourages you to go outside and actually touch grass. That's crazy. How dare you, Panic, making me try new things. So unfortunately, you can't really use the Playdate in a dimly lit room without some kind of lamp or light fixture hanging right above the Playdate. But the trade-off is that the battery life is cracked. While in use, the Playdate can last for around 8 hours, but when it's placed in standby mode, this little guy can stay on for a whopping 2 weeks, at least according to the spec sheet. And I can testify to this because I've left my Playdate here on this desk for 3 days when I was out for the weekend once, and the battery life only went from 100% fully charged down to 90%. So at the very least, this device is great if you want a bright, vibrant little desk clock to put under your monitor for the low price of $230. What a bargain, what a steal. Besides the screen though, the input methods are quite minimal. There's a D-pad and 2 face buttons, which feel nice and clicky. I put them on par with the button feel of a 3DS. There's also a sleep-wake button on the top, a menu button, and a nice fold-out metallic crank. Garrett, why is there a crank on my handheld? Well, hang on, shut up, you're gonna make me cranky. Panic wanted to create a device that felt more tactile, and since the Playdate is a gaming handheld, they felt it was more important to prioritize the feeling of being in control and using your hands. One of the designers even says that they wanted to free us all of our touchscreen psychosis, which sounds like a very weird thing to say, but you can basically translate it to the fact that they didn't want to slap a touchscreen on this because they didn't want to turn people into iPad babies. So therefore, you get crank. The crank itself folds out from the slot on the right side of the device, and once it's out, grab the yellow handle, and off you go. Overall, I gotta say, the crank, it's a good crank. I would put it at a S tier on my crank-based gaming handheld tier list, and here it is right now. It could use some competition. The crank is well designed and incredibly smooth when in use, and the addition of the crank surprisingly doesn't feel tacked on. Many of Playdate's games, software, and even the OS itself feel as if they were developed with the crank used as its foundation, and because of that, I often found many clever uses for the crank that made me question, why don't other handhelds have a crank? Oh, so much better. You can use the crank to scroll through pages, precisely aim laser sights, go fishing, control time, the possibilities are endless. There's a lot of cool games I'll cover later on in the video that use the crank in many unique ways. Overall, I'd say the Playdate is a high-quality device with a sturdy build quality. You can tell some real thought went into creating a design that feels minimalist, yet playful. Underneath the yellow housing, however, you won't find the most jaw-dropping specs. The Playdate packs a 168 MHz Cortex M7, 16 MB of RAM with 8 KB of L1 cache, and 4 GB of flash storage. In other words, most games on Playdate will only be capable of running games with 2D assets. Think point-and-click games, top-down adventure games, roguelikes, 2D platformers, old-school RPGs, games like that. So unfortunately, playing Elden Ring with crank controls will have to wait for another day. Okay, but also, can I level with you? Did you actually think a device that looks like this was going to have like a RTX 4090 Extreme Pro in there? On first glance, it should be quite obvious that the Playdate is not trying to compete with literally anything else spec-wise on the market. From its bright yellow exterior to its unimpressive specs to its complete lack of commonplace features like a screen with backlight or color, the Playdate is here to offer a unique gaming experience that can only be found on the Playdate. So these choices are all intentional. In fact, Cable Sasser wanted to create a device with limitations, as he believes that at the end of the day, constraints always breed creativity.
All of the quirks of Playdate, I think, help tremendously in attracting developers to want to make something for Playdate. If Playdate had a full color OLED screen and a powerful 3D chip, it would take a very long time for one person to say, yeah, I'll make a game for that. By going in the opposite direction of where gaming has gone lately, we return to a scale in which one person, 2 people, 3 people can make an awesome, entertaining, lengthy, meaningful title. And the constraints enable that.
So, was Cable correct? Do the Playdate's games stand out because of the handheld's limitations? Well, to answer that, we need to look into the games themselves. One unique aspect about the Playdate is that the system comes bundled with 24 games included with your Playdate purchase, referred to as Season 1. These are a collection of games made by various indie developers across various genres. You can think of Season 1 as the Playdate's launch titles. More recently, Panic dropped Season 2, which is a all-new collection of high-quality games available at an additional cost on the Playdate's built-in store called the Catalog. The idea with Playdate Seasons is that 2 new games from a season will be sent and downloaded automatically onto your device every week until you've received every game from that season. Season 1 takes 12 weeks to fully download, while Season 2 takes 6 weeks. This is by design. This slow drip feed process is meant to convey the thrill and excitement of receiving a new and fun game every week, and to get users to branch out and try new genres, as you typically don't know what type of game you'll get until you open up the game and try it out for yourself. And to really emphasize this surprise aspect, newly downloaded games are even presented as gifts on the screen that you actually have to digitally unwrap before you even start playing them. It's very similar to how you would have to unwrap new games downloaded from the eShop on a 3DS. This idea is neat, but it obviously won't be for everyone. And with that being said, if you're not a fan of receiving only 2 games per week, you can bypass this weekly download system and download every game all in one go by going onto your Playdate's account and jumping ahead to the end of the season. But I do love this idea. It's one of the core elements of what makes this handheld stand out, and it's nice to see this concept come to life in the final product. The games themselves are genuinely pretty fun, and each differs in terms of genre, scope, and mechanics. There's arcade-style games for when you have only a few minutes to spare, and then there's longer, more in-depth games like Metroidvanias, point-and-clicks, and action-adventure games that can last anywhere from 2 to 8 hours. It's funny, the one quote I thought of when playing a lot of these games was, "I want shorter games with worse graphics made by people who are paid more to work less," and I'm not kidding. And that's exactly what you get with the Playdate. And that quote is a compliment. Every game on this device feels like it was created out of passion instead of profit, which leads to a collection of genuinely fun and novel game experiences. To be honest, there's too many good games to mention, so here are some of my favorite picks from both seasons. Star Sled is an arcade-style game where you use the crank to navigate a ship to capture sparks by orbiting around them, all while avoiding oncoming obstacles. The catch? You use the crank. And the wild part is that using the crank feels intuitive and makes sense, because the crank lets you smoothly rotate the ship in 360 degrees for refined control. It almost feels like the crank is emulating the precision of an analog stick. It's a simple arcade game with a simple premise, and it's great to play when you have a few minutes to spare. What did you just call me? Here's Inventory Hero, a game that has no right to be this addicting. It's a game that asks the question, what if there was an RPG where the sole focus was to manage your character's inventory? Which I know sounds super lame, but just please hear me out. So the hero fights automatically, but every time he defeats an enemy, another item goes into your inventory. This could be a better weapon, new armor, potions, whatever. And all you have to do is equip your hero with the best stuff that they receive and discard the rest. It sounds simple, but as you can probably imagine, this gets insanely chaotic when you get into the later levels and your hero's killing and receiving gear faster than you can manage, and then you start receiving useless trash, and then you accidentally downgrade your character with worse gear because you weren't paying attention, and then rabbits start filling up your inventory like a computer virus, and they eat all of your gear if you don't discard them quick enough, and it gives me a lot of stress, and it's really fun. Here's a weird one, Crankin's Time Travel Adventure. You're this odd little fella named Crankin, who's supposed to meet his girlfriend Crankette for a date, but you're always late. In this game, plot twist, you use the crank, oh my gosh, and only the crank to manipulate time and reach Crankette. Move the crank forward to advance time, move it back to rewind. As you make your way over, you'll encounter obstacles that can't be affected by the passage of time though, like these butterflies. The trick is figuring out how to manipulate time so Crankin's in the right spot to avoid them. It's kind of like your Neo dodging bullets in the Matrix, except not as cool, probably. This is how my grandparents travel to school every day. You can think of it like a time travel puzzle platformer. And fun fact, this game was actually created by Keita Takahashi, who's the creator of Katamari Damacy. And you can really see his friendly, bubbly art style all over this game. Ratcheteer is a fully fledged top-down action-adventure platformer akin to the likes of classics such as Link's Awakening and Link to the Past. You're an apprentice mechanic living underground who operates and maintains these cryo chambers that were constructed for humanity's survival during a brutal winter, and you embark on a journey to find your master mechanic who was abducted during some unplanned maintenance. You got all that? So you set out on a journey to find this mechanic by traversing dungeons, solving puzzles, engaging in tight combat with enemies and bosses, and so on. In this case, the crank is used to light up your lantern in dark spots and to perform moves like your spin attack. If you've got a desire to play a good Zelda-like, this will definitely scratch that itch. Saturday Edition is a point-and-click adventure game. You play as a man named John Cornfield, a man who claims to have been abducted by aliens and returned to Earth back in 1976. And now, 10 years later, Cornfield's story is brought to light again when his town experiences sudden disappearances and the sightings of odd lights in the sky. If there's one aspect of this game that stands out, it's the art style. When you're interacting with people or objects, a pop-up window opens up in the corner to give you a more closer, detailed look at your surroundings. Detailed art and animations pack the game with lots of personality, and the music and sound design is very ethereal and atmospheric. It's the kind of audio that can only be appreciated with a good pair of headphones. Saturday Edition can be beaten in around 3 hours. It's definitely a huge recommendation from me. Oh, and if you rotate the crank, it makes John do a little dance. And because of that, this game is now a must-play. Casual Birder is a pixel art photography game where you take pictures of birds in the seaside suburbs of Birdtown. You use the D-pad to move the camera and adjust focus with the crank. This one is quite reminiscent of games like Pokemon Snap, especially since most birds have a unique puzzle to solve or item you might have to use before you can take a picture of each bird. There's also this funny narrative involving this rival gang called the Pearly-Eyed Thrashers, who are basically your typical Disney Channel type bullies. But instead of stealing your lunch money, they steal your bird pictures. Hate when that happens. This one's really good. It's got some funny dialogue, charming characters, and a surprising amount of content. You can get through this game in a couple of hours. Would highly recommend. My final favorite pick in Season 1 is Zipper, made by Bennett Foddy, aka the guy who pisses off gaming YouTubers.
I'm questioning absolutely everything. Oh no! No! Oh God! No!
Although Zipper is very different from Foddy's usual rage-based platformers, Zipper is an isometric tactical action game where you play as this samurai hell-bent on revenge. Unlike other tactical games though, when you move, the enemies move. So, how do you form strategies? Crank. You use the crank, of course, since moving the crank will display an outline that shows you where the enemies will move on your next turn. This provides this sense of foreseeing the future, creating satisfying moments where you predict exactly where an enemy will end up, opening a chance to slice through your foes like butter as you zip ahead to the next screen. Like Foddy's other games, Zipper is quite difficult, since if you get hit once, you return back to the start of the game. You'll stumble a lot as you try new tactics to defeat the various types of enemies you encounter, but every time you die, you'll always have a little more knowledge and skill than you did on the previous run. Oh, no. So that's just a small glimpse of Season 1. And remember, there's 24 games that come pre-installed with your Playdate, so there's tons of content to delve into before you've even explored what lies beyond. Once you've gone through your Season 1 games, however, I'd highly recommend you check out Season 2. It's a bundle of 12 games that can be purchased for $40 on the catalog store, but also, after forking down this much money, I understand why you wouldn't want to drop another 40. So luckily, if there's only a few Season 2 games that have caught your eye, you can download each separately for around $5 to $12 each. Season 2 only contains half of the amount of games as Season 1, but I'd argue that what the season lacks in quantity is easily made up by the quality of these games. I got a question for you. What if you took the physics-based climbing mechanics from the all-time classic DK King of Swing for the Game Boy Advance, with the interconnected labyrinthian level design of a Metroid game? I'm waiting. What's your answer? Well, the answer, of course, is Tiny Turnip. Tiny Turnip is a charming little 2D Metroidvania platformer, where you roll, climb, and swing your way across a mountain range by using the crank, as you play as a sentient turnip with giant hands. This takes some time to get used to, but eventually I found myself rolling and swinging all over the map like a maniac. There's a bunch of collectibles and hidden platforming challenges to find, and when you start getting good enough, you can even learn Tiny Turnip techniques, like swimming, winding your arms back to launch yourself forth like a catapult, and being able to sustain your momentum with every swing. The speedruns for this game must go crazy. This one might be my favorite Playdate game in Season 2. It might even be my toady. Here's Otto's Galactic Groove. It's a full-fledged rhythm game complete with 30 original songs, a story mode, online leaderboards, a web-based level editor, and it's all played with... Can you guess? Yeah, leave your theories in the comments below, gamers. It's the crank. The music is slapping, the graphics are charming, and the crank is cranking as you move the reticle back and forth to hit oncoming markers and sliders to the beat. If you have any interest in rhythm games, this one's great. I highly encourage you to give this a try. And who knows, with enough time and effort, you too could become the #1 Otto's Galactic Groove player. And then you could show all of your friends your sweet skills, and they definitely wouldn't judge you. They would think you're really cool.
High score! Level up!
Dig Dig Dino is a laid-back game where you uncover fossils at various dig sites. There's no time limit, no pressure, you just use the tools at your disposal to dig up bones and treasure. Ooh, wait, bars. Catch me on Genius next. There's this addicting feedback loop here where you can spend the treasure you find to unlock new tools and upgrades in order to continue digging deeper for new fossils. It's a simple but extremely addicting game, and I think it's one of those experiences that you can easily play while watching TV. Fulcrum Defender is my latest addiction. It's made by the same developers that made FTL and Into the Breach. It's an arcade top-down shooter with roguelike elements. You play as a turret in the middle of the screen, which can be aimed with the crank and fired with the D-pad. And the objective is to defend your turret against the onslaught of enemies for as long as possible by utilizing precise aiming, various weapon upgrades and abilities, and fast reflexes and decision-making skills. The concept is easy to pick up and play, but hard to master and very addicting, with every death tempting me to hop back in for just one more run. The last highlight in Season 2 isn't so much of a game, but a piece of software called Blippo Plus.
You're tuned in and turned on to Blippo Plus.
This is a TV service for the Playdate. There are actual TV channels on here streaming different live action shows, which are all accessible within a real TV guide that is updated over 11 real-time weeks. The series did end not too long ago, however, so now the content is just running on repeat.
Hotkeys, hard wires, and steamy circuits, excuse me? I can't show this on YouTube.
I've been tuning in every now and then, and I can tell you that there's rom-coms with actual storylines, there's whatever the hell this is.
PT.
And there may or may not be some kind of ARG behind all of this. I think this app is supposed to be reminiscent of public access television because when watching these back, these skits and shows here give off that exact same energy.
And now there's aliens watching us? Like, what? Big hairy aliens.
Besides the games and apps that are included with both of these seasons, the Playdate offers hundreds of more games with the inclusion of the catalog. The catalog is Playdate's built-in storefront to purchase and download new games and software. And I won't lie, it's a charming little store. It has its own theme music. You can search for games with the world's first crank-based keyboard. Hell, you can even crank to buy. I'm serious. This is probably the world's first crank-powered payment process. We are truly living in the golden era of crank.
Oh, what? The cranking was too intense.
I hope one day I can just go to a coffee shop and they're like, that's $7.99. Please crank to complete your purchase. So excited for the future of crank. When in sleep mode, your Playdate will let you know if there's any new catalog games with a little notification and a flashing LED on the power button. There are many wonderful games to check out on the catalog, including but not limited to Root Bear. Root Bear lets you fulfill your dreams of becoming a bartender for a group of highly picky bears. You use the crank to fill up glasses full of root beer, attempting to accurately pour the right amount to receive higher tips. If you mess up though, you can't have a handheld with a crank and not have a fishing game. Luckily, realistic fishing fills that role. The gameplay loop hooks you in. You cast your line into the water, use the crank to control the speed of your fishing line as you reel up some fish, and then, as all fishermen do, use your harpoon gun to spear the fish in the air. Add on some nice progression rewards like new fishing equipment and boats, an open sea to explore, and tons of fish to discover, and you got yourself a real catch. Also, I love the fact that after you set the next destination on your map, your fisherman takes out a giant paddle and you actually have to rapidly rotate the paddle with the crank in order to move the boat. This dude must have crazy bicep strength. Echo the Oracle Scroll is described as a non-violent Metroidvania where you jump and dash your way through a variety of distinct biomes. This is a full-fledged puzzle platformer with unique items and abilities, a fully interconnected world, and tons of little secrets to discover. I've put a decent chunk of time into this game, and it's a great time, though some of its later challenge stages will really put your platforming skills to the test. These were just some of my favorites, but of course there's hundreds of more games that you can discover for yourself. If you're curious and want to view more, I'll link the website version of the catalog in the description. Despite the Playdate being more of a niche product, I'm genuinely surprised by how many games have been developed for this system, with itch.io listing over 1,200 Playdate games, not including hundreds more that can be found on the catalog. The main reason for this is because Panic has made development extremely accessible to jump into for beginners and seasoned veterans. For coders, the Playdate SDK is available for free on the Playdate website. This is a complete development package that includes the APIs, important documentation, and a Playdate simulator software to test out your Playdate game whenever you like. And that's cool if you actually know what you're doing. Fortunately for lizard-brained individuals like myself, there's Pulp. It's a no-code, web-based editor for Playdate that lets you create pixel art, music, and some light scripting to create your own simple games and software. Your projects save automatically, and when you're finished, you can download the game as a PDX file, which is the file extension name for a Playdate executable file, and import it straight onto your Playdate. Games such as Island, which is this fantastic little 1-hour adventure game, were made entirely within Pulp. So you can get a lot of leverage with this tool if you know how to use it. But whether you use the Panic SDK or Pulp to develop a game, both are very well documented, as Panic themselves has created extensive development documentation that covers just about everything you'd ever need to know. There's coding handbooks, style guides, you name it. Links are also provided to helpful resources like video guides that walk you through step-by-step tutorials on creating a Playdate game. So with that being said, for anyone who has ever had any desire to try out game development, you actually can't go wrong with developing a Playdate game. Because even if you don't have a Playdate, you can still use either the SDK or Pulp to develop a game and then test and play your game using the Playdate simulator. All you'll need is a PC or Mac, and a USB game controller, and you're good to go. Beyond the games and dev tools I've discussed, there's a couple more uses for the Playdate that, at the very least, I think are worth discussing. While the Playdate is not necessarily built as an emulation handheld, there are a few high-quality retro emulators for Playdate. One notable example is a Game Boy emulator called Crankboy. Sure, maybe nowadays, with the amount of means we have to play Game Boy games, the Playdate is probably the last emulation device on your mind, but I gotta say, this emulator is great. Crankboy runs games with stable performance in almost every game I've thrown at it, running ROMs at full speed with crisp visuals and clear audio output. And the settings menu lets you alter various options like setting an FPS cap, adding custom scripts to enable the crank to work in certain Game Boy games, and even the ability to add patches for your ROMs if you want to play Game Boy ROM hacks. The only big issue to point out here is the app solution for activating the start and select buttons. Because since the Playdate doesn't have those buttons, Crankboy takes some creative liberties by assigning the crank as the start select input by default. Moving the crank clockwise activates start, while moving it counterclockwise activates select. This is serviceable until you start playing games like Link's Awakening, where the only way to access the inventory is by pressing start, so in other words, by moving the crank. This gets tedious very quickly, and sometimes pushing the crank back didn't even activate the start button. So the best solution I've found is to bind the start button to the action of docking and undocking the crank. So now in Zelda, I can dock to open the inventory and undock to close. Yes, it looks really goofy, but it's much more reliable and quicker to execute this way. Besides that, Crankboy is awesome, and if you'd like to download it, I'll put the GitHub link in the description. I also want to shed some light on Playdate Mirror, which is used to output your Playdate video and audio to a PC or Mac. All you have to do is launch the Mirror app, unlock your Playdate, and plug it in. For controller options, you can use either the Playdate itself or any modern game controller. The only difference when using a game controller is that the right analog stick simulates the crank. This software is great if you want to play on a bigger screen, capture some game footage, or if you just want to continue playing a Playdate game at night with a backlit screen. While I'm talking about Mirror, I think it's important to distinguish that Playdate Mirror and Playdate Simulator are two different apps, because this really confused me at first. Playdate Mirror is not an emulator. It is simply just mirroring your Playdate onto a computer, while Playdate Simulator is the emulator that comes with the Playdate's SDK. I hope you're taking notes, because there will be a test. Now, the simulator is supposed to be used for developers to test and run their games in real time as they implement code. However, and this is the coolest part, you can also just use this emulator to play Playdate games without owning actual Playdate hardware. All you have to do is purchase a Playdate game off of a storefront like itch.io, take the included PDX file, drop it into Playdate Simulator, and that's it. You're ready to play. Is this the ideal way to play Playdate games? No, of course not. A lot of these games were made with the actual hardware in mind, so you won't be getting the intended gameplay experience that the devs crafted. But if you're curious about the Playdate and want to try out some of its games, or you just want to dabble in game development, you really can't go wrong with using the simulator. It's a great entry point. And also, I wouldn't blame you for playing the games this way because of... Alright, so let's finally address the big yellow elephant in the room. $230 is truthfully a bonkers price to ignore, and I believe the only way to somewhat understand how Panic came to this number is by understanding the factors that came into play. So the Playdate actually released at $180 during its initial launch in 2022, and has since then seen 2 price increases due to costs outside of Panic's control. Panic is fully aware that its price is a huge deterrent for most people, and they acknowledge that even at the $180 price point, their profit margins at the time were awfully slim. The price then increased from $180 to $200 in 2023, and then again later this year to $230 when Panic had to move factories and were informed by their new factory that the manufacturing costs would increase. Naturally, to offset the increased expenses, they had little to no choice but to raise the price on the consumer's end. And because the Playdate is a niche product with limited demand, Panic can't take advantage of a concept called economies of scale, which is the idea that as a company produces more of a product, the cost of producing each individual item goes down over time. This is a common practice that larger companies can take advantage of, like Nintendo, for example. Nintendo knows that there's high demand for the Switch 2, so they can confidently buy way more parts from suppliers in bulk, and therefore receive a larger discount on those parts due to that bulk purchase. In contrast to the Switch 2, the Playdate has only sold around 70,000 units total. So Panic can't justify ordering a large amount of parts in bulk from suppliers because they're not sure how much demand the Playdate will have in the future. And unfortunately, this means that Panic won't receive any bulk discounts, meaning parts will cost more per unit, which ultimately means that Panic has to sell the Playdates at a high price to make a profit. Yeah, you thought this was a review video. Turns out this is an economics class, surprise. In addition, every Playdate does come bundled with those 24 games in Season 1, so the price might reflect the software value included with the initial purchase. And you also have to account for the Playdate SDK, which is completely free, and any game or software you create with the SDK can be distributed in any way you like on any storefront that you choose. So you could develop a game using the Playdate SDK, but then sell that game on itch.io, and Panic wouldn't receive any cut from the purchase. Now, that being said, Panic does take a cut from any game purchased off of the catalog store because that's Panic's exclusive storefront. But if you don't use the catalog, that one-time Playdate purchase might be the only time Panic ever receives a profit from you, so maybe the price accounts for that as well. And finally, for your average consumer who's looking for a relatively powerful gaming handheld, it's very easy to understand why most people would give the Playdate a hard pass. It's a unique, small, low-spec handheld with no backlit display, 1 bit of color for $230. If the price was back to its original price of $180, or even better, somewhere around $150, I could see how more people would give this system a chance, especially with everything it has to offer, but I don't believe the price justifies the value that you get here. But if you've watched this far, maybe this device has still piqued your interest, so ultimately, I guess there's only one more question left to answer. Who is this for? I think the best way to determine if the Playdate is for you is if you fall under one of these 4 groups. Group 1, you're an aspiring game dev or a hobbyist game dev who wants to try working with a unique handheld. In terms of crank-based handhelds, let's be honest, there's not many choices. So it might be a fun undertaking to figure out how to develop on a system with such a limited amount of input methods and low powered specs, because creating within the Playdate's constraints can genuinely lead to many fun, unique games like the ones I've shown off here. A time travel platformer or a turret to fence shooter are the kind of games that can only be developed for this unique hardware. And Panic has had no shortage of developers who have created over 1,000 polished and charming games and software across the catalog and itch.io, and some of these developers have earned themselves some nice pocket change just for creating something out of passion. The dev tools are plentiful and easy to access as well, so the barrier to entry is almost little to none. Group 2. You're someone who loves original, unique indie games. If you're the type of person who is so down to play just some weirdo stuff like Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion. That's the second turnip-based game I've talked about today. What's up with turnip games? Time Flies, Bug Snacks, Lorelei and the Laser Eyes. You'll love the Playdate. The Playdate is definitely for those who have a more open mind because there's little to no recognizable games or characters from other platforms here. Unless you're like a huge Bullfrog fan, maybe, because Bullfrog is on other platforms. But other than the iconic Mr. Bullfrog, these are all new games. Every game is a Playdate exclusive, with new worlds, new characters, and new ways to play. And since most of these games are only a few bucks each, it doesn't cost much for you, and it greatly benefits the developer. Group 3, users who want to try a new way to play games. If you're a fan of electronics that have some kind of unique feature that changes the way you interact with games, I don't know if I've mentioned this already, but there's a weird thing on the side of the system. It's like it's yellow. The crank really is the start of the show here, and you'll be using it often in most games and software. So if you want something that stands out from other handhelds, this will do the trick. And lastly, group 4. People who can justify spending this much money because they run a YouTube channel covering handhelds, and they justify/cope with their purchase because they claim it's for the sake of the channel, even though they're masking the fact that they have a crippling handheld spending addiction. Honestly, I'm not even sure why I wrote this one down. That's a weird one. The Playdate feels like a statement against the sea of safe, crowd-tested electronics that are constantly being churned out today. It's a truly unique handheld that was designed from the ground up to offer gameplay experiences that can't be found elsewhere. The one word to describe the Playdate is passion. Passion is just emanating from this little yellow handheld. From the way the Playdate was designed, to its unique games, its charming OS, to the developers that create for it, to the team at Panic who went through a decade worth of development to create the system, it all demonstrates how passion was put into every facet of this handheld's existence. So, am I still panicked about clicking on that purchase button? Yes, yes I am. But I do think for the right person, there is something incredible to be found with this handheld. So at the end of the day, I think the Playdate proves one thing. Sometimes the weirdest ideas are the ones worth cranking. Crank.